I grew up in Guatemala, and I was born in a household of just one mother and a couple siblings. We actually were in a single household where our floors were dirt, and we all shared one bed to sleep, and we had one light bulb of electricity. During those couple years, I remember really just going with my mother on the streets and begging, kind of just hopefully trying to make $5 a day, as the area that I was really raised in was one of the most dangerous areas in the country. It was very gang infested, and I just obviously didn't know that at the time, but just that was life to me, introduction to life of the first 5 years. So eventually my mom actually got really sick with asthma or bronchitis, and she was afraid that she was going to die. So what she ended up doing was really putting my sister and I in an orphanage that would take care of us in the meantime. During that time, there were some complications as well with the orphanage when I would have to go sent back home just because of like custody care and just how all that worked back then. And during that time, when I would go back, I would be just kind of going back to the same lifestyle of not eating, maybe eating one meal a day, coming back very sick. So during that time that I was in the orphanage, a missionary family actually moved down from Kentucky, and at the time they have a whole story themselves, but really God challenged them to move everything from their lifestyle to their choices to go be missionaries in Guatemala. And they sold everything and met their mission really was just to help that orphanage. And unknown to me at that time, I would actually get connected with them, because when I would go back to my mother, I would come back and tell them, hey, I was hungry, I was tired, I was sick. The mom of that family really was broken over that. So eventually what ended up happening was the missionary family took me in. So the next 2.5 years I was in that household. It was one of the best years ever. I was being fed every day. I saw what a family was like. I didn't know they were Christian at the time, but I could just see the love and also just the care that they had for me. And I started learning English and just being put in school, so it's got into the education system. So really those when they took me in, and it was very formative for me, and just being able to understand there's more to life than begging on the street and not being fed and just being hungry. And eventually what ended up happening was my mother, she kind of departed from me, and she really didn't, like during those years, she didn't really contact me, and just being able to reach out. And my parents, my family at the time, eventually just like always told her, hey, you're always welcome to visit, but she never did. So it got to the point in 2009 when the recession hit. It also hit other parts of the world as well as the U.S. Recession came and people stopped supporting, and it was very hard for the family to be able to be in the country of Guatemala. They had a very difficult choice to make, because they couldn't financially be in Guatemala, but they also couldn't leave me back, by myself, because my mom didn't want me and the orphanage didn't want to take me in again. So they were in a very difficult situation where adoption was in the conversation. So what the government ended up doing was they said, we need to separate you guys for a couple weeks. So 2.5 weeks go by, or 3, and then they go back to the government agencies and they tell them another 3 weeks. Okay, so another 3 weeks go by, another 3 weeks. And that process keeps on going for 2.5 years. And it was very difficult. I felt like as a child, I've moved around a lot, from orphanage to biological parents to guardians in another orphanage. So I honestly didn't know stability, and not knowing what was happening on the other side of the adoption process, I felt like my parents, my new family that I called family, left me. I was scared, but also confident that the process would happen. But eventually, they ended up adopting me after those 2.5 years. So for the next couple of years after adoption, our ministry really grew. We ended up hosting teams, and were able to just do short-term mission trips for people throughout the country in the U.S. So we stayed back, and it was an awesome environment. Got to, really see ministry first up and firsthand, and seeing it in the family as well. So I really drived into me the foundation of, I would think, just how I look at life, because I lived in poverty. I know what it's like, but I'm also able to help. We also were able to help the people who were in poverty, to build houses for them, do humanitarian projects, and really share the gospel, because, at the end of the day, life is life, but the soul is the goal. Moved here in 2019, was able to enjoy, college, was able to do leadership, was able to meet friends, was able to do life on my own to an extent. During the years of being in ministry in Guatemala and PBA, I was still dealing with a deep sin that not a lot of people talk about. I was in 10 plus years of watching pornography, And it was very hard to talk about it because, I mean, the enemy loves to hide that and loves to shame us with it, especially in my shoes where I was in leadership and I was able to minister and, be the guy that couldn't mess up. You hear that typically, but for me, I really felt like it was just a tough conversation to have. I eventually got in a relationship with someone during my sophomore year, and it was great. It was awesome, and I enjoyed it. But the thing was, I was still deep in pornography, so it was very tough to tell her I love her and be with her, and then the next day just please myself when I wanted to. Eventually got to a breaking point where I remember, finished watching pornography, and then I just felt like such a weight of conviction, but also grace hit me out of nowhere. It was also very scary because I've never really felt that before. The verse that really inspired me was James 5:16. Confess your sins to one another and you will be healed. And I remember just like putting that forefront because what I'm doing now is opening up the roots that have been part of me for the last 10 years. And eventually, you know, those letters went out to mentors and friends, and I was able to really fight this issue that had been with me for a long time. After that night, I wish I could say that that was the last time I watched pornography, and it wasn't. But what changed was I had resources and friends and mentors to really pour into me and challenge me. I had installed Covenant Eyes on my phone and iPad and computer. When I fell short, I could confess to my brothers, like, "Hey, this is happening." I can say confidently now. It's been coming up on a year since I haven't watched pornography. So as I look at my life, I feel like the two pillars of my life are an anchor to what I was, who I eventually could have become in my life back home. Could have been a gang member if I even survived past 10. And that holds me true to who I am, seeing that, I'm here in West Palm Beach, a very beautiful area, but never losing sight of that and never losing sight of the people that still need help and are still living in that. And that anchor also goes into what I do in life. My life isn't about chasing the next promotion, chasing the next big thing. It's about just being content with what I am now and who he's called me to be, whether it's thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, $0. Doesn't matter because I've lived with nothing before. So that's the foundation to who I am today.